So the recording of this actually took place during the recording of the My Hero Academia ship tier list video, which is why throughout this is going to mention ships and such. The ZXEmporer went into way more detail into this. I actually had to cut some of it out from the ship tier list, and I decided to make it like a separate video of its own. So it's not really like an analysis or breakdown on my end, it's more like his end. But everything he said, I've come to a line to agree with of Toga's character. Not completely, but he does bring up some strong points that I cannot argue against. So let's get to the topic of the video.
Problem is that because of the way Toga was written, and then you have the fandom that just decide to go take in a different direction, and because it was still popular, again, I think this is more like, I don't think this was necessarily Horikoshi intended, but instead this is more like an editorial decision that kind of overruled on what Horikoshi wanted. All right, so I'm gonna give my 2 cents here. I'm gonna say this flat out. I despise the yandere trope. I despise the trope with a passion. I am one of those guys that hated Toga from the very beginning. I've never liked Toga. In my opinion, she was not redeemed. This character could have potential, but from every perspective, from both a narrative and a relationship perspective, they dropped the ball hard on what they were trying to do with this character. And the reason why I had to bring up this is because this is kind of how the ship kind of spawned in. It's because of the way this narrative was trying to drive here. And this bullshit on how Toga became this rival for Deku's affection, which when we finally see the chapter where she quote-unquote confesses, Deku just shuts that down like the chat he is. Again, from that narrative perspective of I like the idea of where Ochako potentially being this other form of hero, like who watches the hero, who saves the heroes, and can villains be redeemed. I think that's a fair thing to bring up, right? I think it was just wasted on the wrong character. The character that should have been on this was Twice, not Toga. Twice was really the character of, can a villain really be redeemed? Not Toga, not Shigaraki, all that noise. It was Twice. Either way, Toga as a character was very much a cancer on the series, and the ship did not help.
Okay, calling Toga a cancer on the series is like extremely harsh. Like,
it is harsh, but there's a reason why I believe that, because of the way it ultimately, again, like for me, and I'll say it like this: Toga had the potential of being one of the best written characters in the entire series. The writing was there. The problem is that ultimately it led to nowhere. But you have this scene again with Ochako saying she has the most beautiful smile. The bloodthirsty bitch who's killed God knows how many people, and basically tries to justify it with Shigaraki's new order that they're planning to do. Sorry, I can't feel sympathy for that whatsoever. But a lot of people in the shipping community, and one of the reasons why this ship became so popular,
see, that's the thing. Like,
trying to get that here.
Like their characters you're meant to feel bad for, but not justify their actions. Because like Toga was abused from an early age and forced to have to hide how real feelings.
Now, here's what I can say. Yes, I can agree with that, but here is where that narrative falls by the wayside. If we had seen a moment of, for example, from a narrative perspective, again, where I said like Toga had the best chance of being a really well-written character, and why it ultimately her character ends up being a major, for lack of a better term, basically a tumor on the series, because of the way the narrative got written. In my opinion, where it fell by the wayside is, yes, the abuse is there. You can see that abuse. I'm not denying that. However, what I would have loved to see from that perspective, and we could definitely see how the courts also warp one's mentality, either it's ideology, but to see any semblance of resistance. For example, when we see her as a little kid sucking the blood out of that bird, right? If we can have at least one moment of Toga like hesitating, something akin to being able to resist that quirk craving, right? The idea of being able to, again, even from a little kid, some matter of empathy here, of whether or not the quirk is completely in control. And the problem with that is if you're no longer truly in control, how far does villainy really go, and whether or not it's understood in society. But we see so many other examples of whether or not one is truly in control of one's actions, depending on the art with society. But like I said, you can empathize with somebody doing something bad, but you're not trying to justify him. But the problem is the story is kind of trying to justify him to a certain extent, but I'm just not having it. And you can also see that with how the fandom is trying, because again, part of the story here is how do fandoms interpret the story, and if people are interpreting the story of, oh, can Toga be redeemed? Again, there's something in the narrative that's giving them that message. So ultimately, for me, like I said, there was the potential to really give Toga at least some semblance of real sympathy, had we just seen her at times try to resist the quirk. I'm not saying she should have, just said, be able to not fall for the quirk's cravings, but having some manner of hesitation, some manner of maybe feeling a little bit guilty after feeding on somebody early on when she was young. No, she was blood crazy from the word go. At least having a semblance of there was humanity hidden under that quirk would have made her far more sympathetic and far more, like how we can approach quirks from the mind of counseling versus are quirks destined to completely warp somebody, with no chance whatsoever.
Someone finally said it. Thank you.
And again, this has to do with the idea of the contrast between what we see versus what's shown. And the way I've always seen it, because that's the way it was shown to me, was that like, okay, like, do quirks truly control everything about somebody? In that case, then Toga isn't to blame, but we still expected to have some semblance of free will of stop killing people. It's wrong, but can she be redeemed? Well,
that's the thing, though. Toga did try to resist the urges of her quirk, and that's what caused her to become a psychopath. She literally held down the feelings her quirk has given her to live a quote-unquote normal life. The entire reason she is a villain is because of all those suppressed feelings that came from resisting finally coming to the surface.
I would agree with that, but here's where the issue is. It's what we see on the surface versus we never really get to see her direct thoughts of, again, feeling some semblance of guilt. She's never felt guilty. She feels the need to suppress herself because that's what society puts in, and that's still a form of suppression. It's still a form of suppression, but she's not doing it out of feeling bad. She's doing it because that's what she feels is the necessity. That's a difference between suppressing yourself because it's the right thing to do versus suppressing yourself because that's how you keep yourself living in society. It's both f***ed up, but one is more sympathetic than the other. It's like saying, okay, if we take, for example, a mass murderer who acts completely normal and is acting normal because that's what society deems. Versus...
Wait, why are we talking about Ochako? Why are we talking about Toga? Isn't this about the ships themselves?
But again, this all added up to, it's all in contrary to Ochako and Toga. Like, why this ship could never work, why it's such a, why it flies in the face of everything between these two characters. Like any ship, there could be potential here, but the problem is Toga was really badly written, in my opinion, which just makes this ship far worse in the long run.
Yeah, plus she cried when Ochako tells her that her actions have consequences, which means that she's this psycho's upset to have consequences to her actions, then actually feeling bad for the lives she's taken away because she just wanted to stab people and drink their blood really nilly.
Yeah.
And that concludes the video here. Sorry that it abrupted endly, but again, this is like on the cuff, like analysis from ZXEmperer's point of view. So, and if you liked the video, leave a like and comment. And if you disagree, that's perfectly fine. Please keep things still in the comments. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.
You stand so tall.